Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. Today we're diving into the story of someone you've probably never heard of, but without him, the landscape of modern artificial intelligence might be vastly different. His name was Walter Pitts. His life was brilliant, rebellious, and ultimately heartbreakingly tragic. Let's start with the classic movie Good Will Hunting from 1997. For those who haven't seen it, here's the gist. Set in Boston, the film follows Will Hunting, a young janitor at MIT with an extraordinary gift for mathematics. One day, a professor posts a notoriously difficult math problem on a hallway blackboard, one that stumps all the actual students. Will solves it anonymously, sparking the professor's curiosity. Eventually, he discovers that the mysterious genius isn't a student at all, but a rebellious outsider with a troubled past. Despite being offered high-paying jobs and elite opportunities, Will turns them down to pursue a more authentic life on his own terms. This fictional story closely mirrors the real-life tragedy of Walter Pitts, who was born in 1923. He was a brilliant mind, often left out of the spotlight in the origin story of artificial intelligence. Whether the screenwriters of Good Will Hunting had Pitts in mind is unclear, but their similarities are obvious. Like Will, Pitts was a genius, largely self-taught, with a disdain for institutional conventions. And like Will, he ultimately walked away from the path of acclaim and instead vanished into obscurity. The life of Walter Pitts was unusual. At age 12, fleeing a rough home life and even the police, he hid out in a library in Detroit. In the library he had nothing to do except reading books. Among the books he read was Principia Mathematica, the dense logic tome by Bertrand Russell and Alfred North Whitehead. Pitts not only devoured it, he found errors in the arguments and wrote a letter to Russell outlining them. Russell, convinced the letter came from a university student, invited him to study at Cambridge, but Pitts, too young and already living off-grid, never followed up. At 15, he left home permanently and drifted to the University of Chicago, where he began informally attending classes. In one of those classes, led by Rudolf Carnap, a leading figure in logical positivism, Pitts again showed his uncanny brilliance. One day, after walking into Carnap's office, he pointed out inconsistencies in Carnap's book, The Logical Syntax of Language, and even proposed fixes. Carnap was so intrigued that he spent weeks tracking Pitts down and eventually offered him work and mentorship. This was the beginning of a short but extraordinary academic journey. In 1943, Pitts co-authored a seminal paper with neurophysiologist Warren McCulloch. The title of the article is A Logical Calculus of the Ideas Immanent in Nervous Activity. This paper introduced the McCulloch-Pitts neuron, a revolutionary mathematical model of how real neurons could compute logical functions. Their idea was simple. Neurons could be modeled as binary devices that fire or don't, based on weighted inputs and a threshold. The model demonstrated networks of these neurons could perform Boolean logic operations, and, or, not. Each neuron in their framework was a digital device, and the brain was essentially a computer. This concept is foundational, not just for neuroscience, but for artificial intelligence and the entire field of neural networks. These early neurons are the direct ancestors of today's artificial neurons used in deep learning. The paper provided the first mathematical framework for neural networks, inspiring later work by John von Neumann, Norbert Wiener, and Frank Rosenblatt. Decades before the rise of machine learning, Walter Pitts had helped sketch out its conceptual blueprint. That same year, Pitts met Norbert Wiener, the father of cybernetics, who described him as, without question, the strongest young scientist whom I have ever met. I should be extremely astonished if he does not prove to be one of the 2 or 3 most important scientists of his generation, not merely in America, but in the world at large. Wiener quickly became a mentor and advocate, inviting Pitts into his elite academic circles. At just 20 years old, Pitts was debating with some of the most celebrated intellectuals of the time at Princeton conferences. Despite having no formal training, the University of Chicago later awarded Pitts an Associate of Arts degree in recognition of his groundbreaking work with McCulloch. It was the only diploma he ever received. He could have easily gone on to a glittering academic career, but that wasn't who he was. Pitts had always been an outsider, but as the years passed, his isolation deepened. After a falling out between Wiener and McCulloch, largely due to a misunderstanding involving Pitts, he withdrew completely from academic life. His mentor gone and his social circle fractured, Pitts stopped publishing, declined invitations, and eventually cut off contact with most of the world. In a moment of despair, he burned his unpublished manuscripts on neural networks, years of research lost forever. He fell into alcoholism and depression, his mind still brilliant, but his life unraveling. He died in 1969 from bleeding caused by cirrhosis of the liver, just 46 years old. After his death, Pitts's name did fade into obscurity, especially compared to his collaborators like Warren McCulloch, or even Norbert Wiener and John von Neumann, who were also involved in the broader cybernetics movement. Nonetheless, his name re-emerged in 2015 when Amanda Gefter published an article titled "The Man Who Tried to Redeem the World with Logic" in Nautilus. This in-depth profile significantly rekindled public interest in Walter Pitts's life and contributions. Today, as AI advances at breakneck speed, it's worth remembering that the very architecture behind it, binary neurons, logical calculus, neural computation, was laid down by a man who never sought fame, never earned a PhD, and died nearly forgotten. Pitts's story isn't just a tale of genius lost, it's also a cautionary reflection on how brilliance alone isn't enough. Unlike the proverbial prophets who were rejected by their times, Pitts had peers. He had champions: Russell, Carnap, McCulloch, Wiener. The tragedy is that even with all this support, he couldn't or wouldn't step fully into the limelight. He chose obscurity, perhaps out of principle, perhaps from pain. No doubt, Pitts never fully realized his extraordinary potential. It's hard not to wonder, what might he have achieved if he had walked a different path? Let's remember Walter Pitts as a true pioneer of neural networks, a quiet giant whose story continues to fuel our drive to innovate. He didn't shy away from authority, not even towering figures like Bertrand Russell or Rudolf Carnap. Pitts had the courage to challenge their ideas, to debate, critique, and push the boundaries of established thought. His legacy reminds us innovation often begins with questioning the status quo. Let's also remember him as a self-taught scholar, a relentless learner who, despite lacking formal education and institutional support, mastered advanced mathematics on his own, reaching the intellectual level of the very minds he once read about. Maybe it's time we stop blaming our limitations on a lack of resources or access. Instead, we take ownership of our learning, like Pitts did. And perhaps most importantly, we should consider following in his footsteps, not in seeking fame or validation, but in pursuing knowledge purely for the love of truth. Pitts wasn't in it for recognition, and yes, his name faded from memory for a time. But in the long run, history found its way back to him, and it remembered him rightly, as a mind far ahead of his time. Let us remember Walter Pitts not as a footnote, but as a cornerstone of AI. If you found this story moving or fascinating or both, hit that like button, drop a comment below, and let me know. Had you ever heard of Walter Pitts before? Share this video with a fellow nerd, dreamer, or rebel, and of course, subscribe for more deep dives into the stories behind data science and machine learning. Thanks for watching.